as much as any week, just because we have the chance to really think about leadership in remarkable ways. And we're so lucky this morning that we have one of our SEM trustees and SEM graduates back at SEM to speak with us. TransAfrica Forum, in case you didn't know, is the oldest African-American human rights and social justice advocacy organization in the United States. TransAfrica educates the public to deepen the understanding of issues and cultures of Africans in Africa and the diaspora, with a focus on U.S. economic and humanitarian aid to Africans and African descendants throughout the world. TransAfrica brings a critical perspective to foreign policy, decision makers, and works for more justice in policies for the African world. Nicole has been Executive Director of TransAfrica Forum for the past, I think, 7 years. She also has been named one of the top 150 most influential African Americans by Ebony Magazine. She is also the recipient of the Distinguished Alumni Award from the UB Law School for Students of Color. She's a remarkable woman, and it's a privilege to have her on the SEM Board of Trustees, and also a privilege to have her speak this morning. She's also the mother of 2 future SEM students, and one of them is right here, Zinzi, in the front row, and if you haven't seen her, she's a wonderful young woman already, and we can tell she'll be right at home at SEM. So this morning meeting is going to go a little bit long, but it's such an honor to have Nicole here, so I hope you join me in welcoming her.
Good morning, ladies. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak with you. Wow. I haven't been on this stage in a long, long time. And it was really on this stage where I, kind of got my start in public speaking, listening to your speeches. I'm so impressed by each and every one of you. And I'm sure if I heard the rest of the students speak, I would be equally impressed, because there is something about listening to a young woman talk about her aspirations, talk about who she is, talk about her strengths. And I, frankly, been a lot of places, and it's very unique to hear a SEM girl talk about who she is. There's a strength that comes from it that, frankly, I don't hear everywhere I go. So I'm really blessed and honored to be here, and I'm going to do something that I don't do very often, but I'm going to talk a little bit about myself, because I'm going to have an opportunity to speak with many of you today, and I'm sure you guys have a lot of different questions, whether it's about my work or how I got started in human rights, or just how to make it. What do you do after high school? What do you do when you get to college? How do you decide who and what you want to be? So I thought I would give just a general overview this morning, and then we can talk more. How does that sound? I have a little slideshow that I started. This is actually a picture of me in Haiti. Haiti is a country I spend a lot of time in, so I'll probably refer to it a little bit later in the presentation. But this is me, and I know you all recognize this picture. They all basically look the same, unless you can see the faces, right? They're long white dresses, the dozen roses. I mean, this is really where I got my start, and I know when you hear alumni speak, they probably, a lot of them say that SEM really gave them the confidence to move forward and to do what they wanted to do with the rest of their lives. And I can tell you that for me, that it was no different. When I came in at 14, I wasn't someone that would stand up for what she believed. I wasn't someone that felt comfortable in front of a crowd. And when I left, probably much to the chagrin of some of the faculty members, I had no problem saying exactly what I thought at any given moment. I had some other influences too, and you heard about TransAfrica, but I thought it would be good to talk a little bit about some of my influences in terms of getting involved in human rights. Human rights was something that I always thought about. And when I was growing up in Buffalo, there weren't a lot of people talking about international human rights. You heard a lot about poverty, send your $10 a month to help a starving child, but there wasn't a lot of conversation about what's going on in these countries that are creating poverty. What are the issues that Africa, for example, as a continent, and then the individual 53 countries, what are they facing? I wasn't hearing a lot about that, but for some reason, when I did, my ears would perk up and I would really get excited. I would get excited about the issues of human rights. And so one of the things I did at SEM is I formed an Amnesty International chapter. I'm not sure if you guys have one here now. You probably have something like that, something that looks at international issues. But that was my first kind of instruction about what was possible. What were people doing? Could you start a campaign? Could you start a boycott? What could you do to affect change in the world? I put a little UV symbol because I know for many of you, colleges is looming. And I will tell you, this is not something that I say everywhere, I went to UB, I went to SUNY Buffalo. I did not want to go to SUNY Buffalo. That was not my first choice. It was not my first choice at all. And I spent a lot of my senior year moping about it. And I ended up actually going to UB for financial reasons. Some things had changed in my family that just made it necessary for me to go stay in town and go to school in town. My dream was Columbia. I wanted to go to Columbia. I was ready for Columbia. I had my Columbia paraphernalia. I was just ready to go. I'd been to New York a couple times. I thought this would be perfect. I'm certainly not saying that aspiring to go to an Ivy League school isn't important. I think it is. But I definitely would not be the person that I am today if I had gone to Columbia. I probably would be fine, but I would just be different. Going to a state school, having the experience of not getting exactly what I wanted was actually very good for me. And it made me work much harder to make sure that I was seen. UB was huge. I mean, I came from SEM, I go to this huge place. It's in Buffalo still, not necessarily what many people would consider to be like an international human rights capital, although it's actually getting there now. But it wasn't at the time. But I had to deal. I had to deal, and I did, and I'm actually very glad that I went to UB. I stayed at UB and went to the law school as well, which is not necessarily the best law school or considered to be the best law school in the United States, but it was for me, and so I believe you have to do what's right for you. I'll show you a few pictures of Haiti, but really where I got my start in human rights was in Haiti, which again was not my first choice of the country I wanted to work in. When I started out in law school, I thought, well, I'm going to go somewhere more exotic. I'm going to go to Rwanda like Alison DeForge. I really wanted to be in Africa. I'm going to go and do all these different things in South Africa. I thought that would be a great place. I sent out hundreds of inquiries, and I applied to probably about 60 places. And I got one offer, and that was in Haiti. And once again, I'll tell you, if I did not go to Haiti, I would not be standing before you. And I put up a picture of Ani DeFranco. And I have no idea if you guys like Ani DeFranco, but in high school we loved Ani DeFranco. Yeah, she's amazing. And she's from Buffalo. And another example of someone who really did amazing things. Starting off, and you wouldn't necessarily think this woman's going to affect change internationally, but she really does, and she still inspires me today. I put up a few other people, but one person I would want to point out is Alison DeForge. 20 years ago, from this podium, I think it actually was this podium, Alison DeForge spoke. And she was a woman who actually was a human rights advocate, a very well-respected human rights advocate. And she told us a story of what was going on in a country called Rwanda that, frankly, I can tell you, I had never heard of. And she talked about the fact that there were some looming concerns, and she believed there would be a genocide in Rwanda. And I knew about genocide because I had studied World War II. I was very interested in the issues that faced Jewish people in Europe prior to World War II and then the Holocaust. This was something that very interested me. So when she said genocide, I thought, wow, that can really happen again. Like this is very real. And sure enough, about 18 months after she came to SEM, a genocide did break out. Despite all of her efforts, and as I learned more about her on the world stage, she basically camped out in Congress for weeks begging for someone to do something. Alison was an amazing woman and had a major impact on my life. She passed away a few years ago, but her impact on human rights is really felt, and she lived right down the street from here. So TransAfrica, you've heard about TransAfrica. After living on the continent of Africa and living in Haiti for a long time, witnessing a coup and a few other kind of crazy things, I actually got an offer at TransAfrica to just be a researcher there. And about 6 months after I arrived, the president of TransAfrica at the time, who was about 30 years my senior and very well respected, and everybody knew, you Googled his name and like, you know, a million hits came up, very well respected, decided to retire. And I spoke with my boyfriend at the time, and he said, well, you should apply. And I thought, well, that's crazy, because I didn't say I'm not a man, but I said things like, well, I'm not as respected as he is, and I'm not this, and I'm not that. But then it did occur to me, why not apply? Why not do it? At least as a test balloon. At least they know I'm serious about this human rights thing, and I kind of like this organization. And in the end, I was chosen. And it wasn't an easy road. There's a lot of things when you're at SEM that I believe you probably take for granted. I took for granted, for example, that I would never be told by another woman, you're too young to do something, or you're not well connected enough to do something. And I did hear all those things, and it was hard. It was not an easy process. A lot of times when people reach what they consider success, they'll tell you, oh yeah, and then, you know, I did this, and I did this, and I did this, and that formula led me to success. It's frankly not that easy. Sometimes you're going to come up against obstacles, and sometimes people who you have a respect for are going to say things that aren't necessarily what you believe to be the case. They may believe that women shouldn't be involved in leadership. I've heard that. I've come off of stages and had people say, don't you think a man should run TransAfrica? You have to be prepared for all of those things if you are in a role where you are kind of out front, if you will. But I did get the job at TransAfrica because clearly there are people who agree with the values that we have, that women do need to be really, especially when you're talking about human rights, really need to be at the forefront. Unfortunately, when you go into any war zone or any area of the world where there's conflict, the first victims are always women and children. They always are, no matter what. A lot that has to do with economics also has a lot to do with just the inability to get away from a conflict situation. And so, as the first woman and the first woman to run TransAfrica, and also the youngest person to run TransAfrica, I really made young women a real focal point of my work. So, just to show you, TransAfrica works all over the world. Yes, it has Africa in the name. We work in a lot of countries in Africa on all sorts of issues. We work on LGBT rights in Uganda, something that I've spent a lot of my personal time on. We work on militarism, whether it's in East Africa or West Africa. We work on issues of governments. Obviously, there are some governments in Africa that are not doing the right thing by their people, whether it's gross human rights violations or kicking people off the land so that large corporations can come in and do investment projects. We, frankly, fight against all of those things. And we work with community organizations on the ground to help really affect this change. We also work in Latin America and the Caribbean. A lot of people think, oh yeah, of course, there are people of African descent in Haiti, but people don't think there's tons of people of African descent in Brazil and in Colombia and in Panama and Peru. And they have very unique issues. It's not just, oh, all Peruvians have these issues or all Colombians have these issues. They're very unique issues to people based upon race and socioeconomic class. So we work in those regions as well. Clearly. And I also work in Europe. I spend a decent amount of time in Europe because there are issues of racism in Europe. In places like France and the UK, where you have these burgeoning communities of color, not just from Africa, but from all over, you do have tensions, you do have conflict, and so TransAfrica works there as well. So what do I do? When I first thought I wanted to get involved in human rights, I didn't really know what that meant. I knew that, I would write some letters, and there would be some boycotts, and there would be that sort of thing. I didn't realize what the work would be on a day-to-day basis, and as a lawyer, one of the things that I learned in law school is how important it is to get your facts straight. So I spend most of my time in terms of my research mode, or my research role at TransAfrica, interviewing victims of human rights violations. And that's something that I started in Haiti. This is a picture of me back in Haiti after the earthquake. This woman is actually a community organizer. She worked in a community that was at the epicenter of the earthquake, and she was telling me how, even though I had just been told by a huge organization, a charitable organization that you all know the name of, but I'm not going to say it here, but that they had been given millions and millions and millions of dollars, she was telling me that no, actually the aid that they said had gotten to this area had not gotten there. So it was a disappointing moment, but very important, because we came back, wrote a report, and all of a sudden money just showed up in this area. This is another picture, and yes, it's totally old school BlackBerry. This is from the earthquake. But what I'm actually doing is I'm videotaping people being removed from their homes after the earthquake. As you know, people were living in these shelters, if you will, and there had not been a lot of debris removal, so people couldn't go back home. So a lot of them were living on other people's land. Well, what began to happen is landowners, even if they weren't using the land, started getting really angry and saying, we want you to leave. We don't want all these quote-unquote squatters on our land. And yet these are women and children, once again, who have nowhere else to go. And so what I was doing was documenting these people being removed by thugs, frankly. And there was a lot of violence. And it's one of the reasons this guy, I don't know if you recognize him, his name is Danny Glover. He's an actor. And does a lot of TV and movies, and he's actually the chairman of my board, so he's like my boss, basically. And we've gone down to Haiti, and we've gotten a report. Our team had sent us a report as we were going to a meeting with the former president of Haiti. Our team got a report saying that this was happening, there was this eviction happening. And I said, okay, and I gave some instructions about, how to document it and the sort of information that we needed. And Danny turns to me and says, what's going on? And I told him what was happening. He was like, oh no, that's more important than this meeting. We've got to go see these people. We've got to go help. Maybe I can talk to the landlord. Maybe I can be of some help. So we got there, and it actually did make a difference. I mean, it's kind of strange. We do live in a celebrity-driven culture, and the landlord, who was so angry and was just, yelling at these people and telling, beat up this woman over here, she's the leader, and all of these things, he actually stopped and said, hey, weren't you in Lethal Weapon? And then had a conversation, and he actually was very angry. I mean, and he had some legitimate grievances, but that eviction that day ended. And what was interesting is when we got back in the car, we were Danny and I were remarking how, great it was that eviction ended, but we couldn't be everywhere that day. And so people were still, evicted from these sorts of wonderful areas. I mean, it's not as if they're living in someone's posh home. They're literally just trying to make it every day and living in tents. Gender-based violence is something that I've worked on in the Congo and in Haiti. And I have conducted interviews with children as young as 3 years old who have been raped or assaulted in areas that are just unsafe. It's not safe living in a refugee camp. It's not safe living in a war zone, and really horrible, horrible things happen. But these reports have been very important because it really does highlight the stories of the women. And one of the reasons why I love TransAfrica is we don't say things like, we give voice to the voiceless. I actually don't believe in that. I mean, after working in human rights, I think that that's the one fallacy that I always try to dispel. There's no such thing as being someone's voice. Everyone has a voice. But often people are from countries like Haiti and the Congo and many places, they are shouting so loud and we can't hear them, in part because we don't listen. And so what I try to do is be an amplifier, if you will. So when I talk to this young girl, you see her in a purple t-shirt, she's about 6, and she had TB because she had been living in a displacement camp and also had been assaulted in that displacement camp. So I ran her interview, talking to her, getting her to kind of explain to me what happened. She has a voice, even though she's small. And what I try to do is bring that voice to people who can actually do something to change your circumstance. And so I spent a lot of time in Congress. This is a congresswoman, her name is Yvette Clarke, who I came back and I told her all these stories, and she got really angry, and so she held some briefings and some hearings on the issue, and also took a couple people to task that have money that is allocated for those sorts of people, those sorts of women and girls to get out of camps and to get into real homes. And so that's extremely important, and a big part of my job is talking to politicians, whether they be local and state politicians or the Obama administration. I spend a lot of time with them, and I spend a lot of time with Congress. This is, we look mad because we had just come from a hearing where we had been asked a ton of questions that didn't have anything to do with what people needed. It was a hearing on Zimbabwe, so we were kind of annoyed. This is your congressperson, Brian Higgins, who was really awesome and gave me this great flag. It was an American flag that hung over the Capitol. It was really cool. But just for example, if there are things that you care about, that's his job. And he's got an office in Buffalo and an office in D.C. So I'll handle him in D.C. You guys handle him in Buffalo. What you care about. And then I spend a lot of time on stuff that doesn't seem like it would be human rights. I have to go to a lot of dinners and galas and things like that and meet people who can make a difference. People can make a difference because they have a lot of money, quite frankly. People can make a difference because they have a lot of influence because of what they do or who they know. So I spend a lot of time doing that too. This is, Jesse Jackson is in the background, but this is actually the vice president of the Red Cross, the international, or excuse me, the US-based Red Cross. And we're all smiling and everything, but we had just had a meeting where we were just yelling at each other about humanitarian aid and where money was going. And, I mean, it was just, it was very vitriolic, but yet we still have to work together. And that's something that those of us in D.C. who really are trying to make change, we have to remember. You can disagree, but you still have to come back to the table. The other thing we do a lot of is public awareness meetings, and this is actually a meeting. The little guy in the middle is actually a very powerful person. He runs the largest LGBT organization in Uganda. While he was with us, I met him over email. I saw an article about him, and I emailed him, and I said, hey, if there's ever anything we can do, and he said, yes, this is a list of things that you can do. And so we began doing them. While he was with us in D.C., his deputy director was murdered because his name was put in the newspaper as a gay man in Uganda. And I sat there stunned when we got the news, and Frank said, I need your phone. And he got on the phone, and for the next 3 hours, he sat there helping, giving direction, letting people know what to do next. Never cried. This was his best friend. Never cried, never was flustered or confused. And I think about people like Frank, because those are the sorts of people that really are making a difference in this world. You'd never know him if you didn't follow the issue. He's not rich and famous living in Hollywood, but he is making a huge difference in Uganda every single day. And it's a real example. So whenever I get really annoyed or mad or I want to cry because someone says something to me that's hurtful, I have to remember, and I do remember, people like Frank. The good stuff. So sometimes we do protests. We do a lot of protests. I've been able to be a part of some really interesting ones. Last year, I got arrested in front of the Sudanese embassy because the Sudanese government has determined that Darfur and other regions in Sudan are still up for grabs in terms of bombing and oppression. And it just got to be too much. So George Cooney, who's really followed Sudan, came into town, and his office called my office and said, we were wondering if you would come down and speak at our event. And absolutely. A lot of people consider TransAfrica as being representative of what African Americans believe around international issues, and to some degree we are. So it was great. I went down there, and then I got I was like taken up at the moment, and in the moment, and I decided to get arrested with George Clooney. So this is me like signing with my, I was signing the paperwork to be arrested, and smiling because I was so like, oh my gosh, what is going to happen now? I wish I could tell you I spent a lot of quality time with him. He's very, very nice. But no, they put me in a separate cell, and I had to really, they put all the men. You should know this about being a woman in leadership. They put all the men in one cell, and they're all joking and laughing and having a great time. myself based on regulations. And so I'm literally, at the window, like, because I wasn't on the original list, so I had all of these thoughts. Oh my gosh, they're going to forget I'm here, and I'm going to be here overnight, and my daughter has to be picked up very soon, that kind of thing. But no, it worked out fine. But that also is a part of it, and it's a tactic, right? Like, people see the arrest and this, but it's a tactic to get more public scrutiny, more public awareness on the issues. I love these pictures, and they're as inspirational as every George Clooney picture to me, because women are making a huge difference with very little. So I put this picture in because one of the things I did want to make sure that I said to you today is just a couple of things, and I know I've run out of time. So I know you in a way, and I know your influences, and one of the things I want to share with you is always give yourself a little bit of space as you're pursuing whether you want to be a doctor or a lawyer or a physicist or Ani DeFranco, reincarnated, whatever you want to be, give yourself a little bit of space. And sometimes it's a very, very small bit of space. So a friend of mine who also works in human rights, we were getting very overwhelmed with one of our campaigns, so we started to crochet. I know that sounds crazy and old-fashioned, but it was amazing. It was amazing. It gave me time to get myself recentered, to think about things since I was having a baby. We crocheted a lot of booties, and you can see the actual work here today. Give yourself space, even if it's something crazy, even if it's something that's completely out of character. I wouldn't really be considered like a girly girl sort of crocheter kind of person, but it was nice to do something different. This is a picture of my three best friends, Aisha, myself, Kim, and Ann. We met in these pews. They are still my best friends. And I put their picture in here. We all go on vacation together every year. We see each other every New Year's. I'm godmother to Aisha's son. It's so important to keep people in your life, no matter where you go or how important you become, to keep people in your life who knew you when and who really love you. Because it's more difficult as you get older. You certainly will make more friends, but it will always be different. So as much as you may fuss and fight or get into petty stuff and text too much and say things on Facebook you really shouldn't say, remember that they're your friends. And remember that you all care about each other. Because there will be times in your life, whether it's the death of a parent, or it's when you get married, or when you have babies, that you will really, really rely on those folks. The last picture, well, the second to last picture, also seems a little quaint, if you will. I put this in here because there's been a lot of talk about Leaning In, that new book, Leaning In. I don't know if you guys have heard about that. It talks about what young women need to know and what need to do going into the workforce. I actually disagree with a ton of things that are in the book and some of the premise, but one of the things that she says, and I've started saying this, and I think you guys are at the right age to hear this, is that you have to find a really supportive partner, or it's not going to work. If you're going to have a partner, you need to find a really supportive one. And it helps to have someone who also has dreams and aspirations. So it's important, because sometimes we don't take ourselves very seriously when it comes to that kind of thing, when it comes to dating and getting married and all that. It's extremely important. You could go and just cut a line down from the people who find supportive partners and the people who don't, and what happens in their lives and how they're able to be successful. Because success is not just about the accolades and the awards, it's also about being happy, and that's super important. The last two things I was thinking about, there's a big difference between the freshmen, the sophomores, and the juniors, and the seniors. I would say if you're a freshman and you're sitting in the pews and you're listening to me, really this freshman or sophomore, the only thing I really want to leave you with is use this place. One day I came up with an idea for a play, and I brought it to a teacher, and the next thing I knew, the play was produced. Not the next thing, it was hard work, but it actually happened. You can't do that everywhere. And you realize when you leave this place that not every place that you're going to go, not every institution you're affiliated with is going to give you those sorts of opportunities. And if you're a junior and senior, enjoy this place. You've only got a little bit more time. And as I've told you, this school has given me so much personally that I've been able to take, frankly, around the world and learn so much. So enjoy it while you're here. That doesn't say you don't need to work hard like the freshmen and the sophomores, but remember to savor every moment. Thanks. I can't wait to talk to you all later. If there's any questions, I don't know if we have any time, but if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Nicole will be around for all morning, so look for her, go to the office, they'll know where she is if you can't find her. Here's an announcement.
Particularly during second period, this will be speaking Upper Westchester, so if you have free time, you can stop up and listen. And then also please check out the community service where we have an event tonight and tomorrow, so make sure you stop by and sign up.
Seniors, I need you